Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Marilyn. Marilyn. You can call me Merlyn, Marilyn, or you can call me Nomsa, which is actually the name I go by at home. I'm going to be talking to you about the new generation of African reptobiologists, my perspectives on it, as somebody that came here not knowing that I actually was a reptobiologist. Are we talking about the challenges and also opportunities there? Oh, okay. This is the opposite way. So, as been said, I'm Marilyn and I'm a trainee from Zimbabwe. I was first here in 2017, and now I'm a reptobiologist, a storyteller, and a writer. Kid you not, these are things I didn't know about myself, and these are things I left here knowing about myself. I didn't know I was a writer until I wrote to my first article to Raptor Diaries, and a few months after I got back home, I started my blog, my birding blog, that I named Big Birdie 101, because I'm terrible at naming things. And I started writing from there. And now I have a link tree. I'm a well known conservation critic, and I write a lot of thought provoking thought leadership, conservation leadership articles back home. I'm also thinking of writing children's books as well. So if you have any knowledge how I can go about that, I'd love to listen to you and talk to you. I consider myself a storyteller more than a researcher or a scientist, because I think as people we connect in story and storytelling. That's how we're all here. We all carry stories and we all understand each other in story. And I didn't know as a reptobiologist. I was just a girl who liked birds. And Jenny said earlier how you feel like such a misnomer when you're out there, until you come to a place like this and people geek out about birds and you feel normal. The first time I expressed in high school that I was interested in conservation, the entire lecture theater of my senior class laughed. They burst in laughter. And it was the most embarrassing day of my life. But there was so much validation to coming to spaces like this and discovering myself and putting a name on what I'd not known I was. So this was my first time at North Lookout, my first time in snow. I sat up there and asked where East was, and I looked over and said, over the horizon is my home. But a few months later, this was my home when I left. So I'll quickly talk to you, or try to quickly talk to you about raptor conservation in Africa, the challenges and the realities really facing raptor biologists, and also how change can come about, what are the opportunities there. So when you think of raptors in Africa, you think of powerful eagles like the martial eagle, you think of the diversity there. But research trends are showing that there's just so much knowledge gaps in reptobiology in Africa. There's so little known still. And actually, we're seeing that most of these gaps are in the tropics, where most of Africa is, and most of this reptobiodiversity is. Also, one of the recent papers that was just published last year says African raptors are showing really widespread population collapses. We've had studies going on since the 80s, if not earlier, in the past, that have been reiterated, that have been done again now, like bird atlasing studies showing as big as 50% declines in some really charismatic raptor species that you would think actually are so visible and so awe-inspiring. They're getting all the conservation they need, but so little is known about why this is happening and what can be done to reverse such trends. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to hold this mic. Yeah, better. Um, that first paper also shows where threatened birds are in the world. And you can see here, Africa, where I'm from, is really got most of the heat in terms of birds that are threatened. This is the really beautiful white-headed vulture, which is critically endangered. You can see where most declining raptors are. So some of those are common, but they're showing trends of decline. Owls, we've got a great diversity of owls. One of my first days here, we went out to band ring barred owls, and I was hearing stories of how they're actually becoming a problem bird because generally raptors here are doing well. But we know nothing about African owls mostly. And one of those papers I showed you just now says owls were the least studied groups of raptors, and therefore they're the highest priority for future research. There's so few researchers that are focusing on owls, and they're faced with so many threats, you know, from traditional beliefs to not even being studied for you know, issues like wind farm developments and other things. But who is conserving raptors in Africa? It's always been this big boy club, you know, as much as ornithology is not diverse in Africa, as much as we need it to diversify, raptor biology is even worse. And it even gets worse because of the lack of diversity racially and socioeconomics. I'll tell you a little about me. I already said when I came here, I was just a girl, young girl that liked raptors. But I was talking to Keith earlier and I felt tears welling up in my eyes because I didn't know how anybody gets on to do a PhD. I didn't think that would be me. But today I'm a PhD candidate in my final year. This is the beautiful jackal buzzard, really beautiful bird that's endemic to Southern Africa. I'm currently studying it, its movement ecology around wind farms in South Africa. I did my master's on black eagles, a very charismatic eagle from my country that citizen scientists have been studying for over 60 years. We celebrated the anniversary of our study, 60th anniversary last year, and I managed to do my master's study on that bird. I mentor a lot of young African raptor biologists, and like I said, I tell stories, you'll see. So before Hawk Mountain, I didn't think I could do this. I didn't know it was possible, but coming here gave me the confidence to go and to do these things. I came into a world of possibility where your ideas could be realized and were not none were ridiculous, you know, and also the confidence of a community of different kinds of people that believe in the same thing. So since I've been a trainee, this is me, believe it or not, this is another human being down there. So this is me up a tree. I received 2 research grants, one from the African Bird Club. Another thing I didn't know was possible that I could write a grant application. So I found myself in 2018, 2019, having won 2 research grants, which was exciting. And one of them was the Hawk Mountain Soar Grant. So this is a follow-up grant for alumni, if you've got a research idea, to develop the ideas back home. And this is so important because for many of us, you leave here to go back to your country and you're faced with the same struggles, lack of access, lack of vehicles, lack of fuel, and so on and so forth. With this SOAR grant, I managed to pay for fuel, pay for equipment, pay for laptops, pay for travel to my very first conference, and present the work we were doing here with the critically endangered African whiteback vulture. I was, though, on top of this tree without any gear, without medical insurance. Like Walter said, when you're young, I would never do this again. But I was so amped, I was so excited, and coming up at the top of that tree and finding a baby vulture tucked in there was just a dream. It was just what I felt I was born to do, and it kept me in this field in a time between my undergrad and master's, 4 years of unemployment, 4 years of no opportunity to see birds. I remember I bought a camera when I was here and I had to learn to photograph people because there were not going to be a lot of chances to be in a park, let alone birding and that sort of thing when I went back home. So a grant like this to be able to fuel a car and be part of research was really something that kept me in science, believe it or not. I've led numerous public seminars, but one of the most important ones to me was this one. Children from all sorts of different schools. I was not related or not anyone related to these kids. I just put a poster outside the public library of my city, and all sorts of kids came. And Hawk Mountain sent me a consignment of very many of this book, Percy the Victorious Vulture. And together with the Natural History Museum back at home, I was lent this Marshall Eagle mount for the kids to see something lively. Um, about a year or two later, I met a man, was it a woman, who said, I know you, I know you. I had a 2-year-old child, well, a baby, this kid here. I met this woman. She said, my child won't stop saying roadkill. Yeah, I've met a lot of people who've come to my public talks, at fairs and whatnot, and they'll say, I know you," and they that's the first time they get to talk to somebody or hear about vultures, and it's really warmed me and given me a sense of purpose. I take part in field expeditions for research, environmental impact assessments, and most importantly, for training upcoming ornithologists and biologists. This is in Mozambique. If some of you have heard of it, the Gorongosa Restoration Project in Mozambique. I fortunately was also ballsy enough to just, when they were looking for an ornithologist, put up my hand, and I was I found myself training fellow master's students as a master's student, and they were calling me professor, and but I knew something they didn't. They had never been trained in ornithology, and I had to have that confidence. I remember emailing the Harvard professor that leads the team there, and he said, "Thank you so much for volunteering." I said, your advert didn't say volunteering, but I'll have you know, here's my CV of relevant experience." And some of that was experience I got here at Hawk Mountain. And I said, after you've seen my CV, I will further on let you know that of all the ornithologists you'll get, I will be the best. I will look like your students. I'll be as enthusiastic as you'll ever get them. And if anyone's going to make an impression on them, it'll be me. They offered me some compensation, and I was there, and I've been there ever since. Um, you know, that was that was 2021, and they've been calling me back for expeditions there. I've grown in my confidence in what I can do. And for somebody here, they might think, oh, that's so, you could have gone if you love your work. I was also doing environmental impact assessments, and I actually got to know what my skills are worth when developers are paying, and I had to teach, people in our industry that actually can afford to compensate biologists, especially young biologists, that we are worth something, and we actually need that support to stay in the field. I also founded a youth conservation club, Benau Society, um, and I used ornithology as a conduit to have people start. The first time I was at a national park, it was my second year of undergrad, but there is a national park 35 kilometers away from my home. So, well, 35 kilometers, I don't know how, but it's really close. 35 kilometers is really close. That's how ridiculous the situation is in terms of access and the way parks are designed in Africa, or the relationship for the general public with parks. So we are now called the Matabeleland Youth Conservation Society. And it's a labor of love for me, something I'm passionate about. I was very happy when Jenny was showing you guys the impact that youth programs can have on young people. And like I said, when I started my journey to choosing a vocation to study, young people like me laughed that I was interested in nature. But pre 2019, when we started, everyone thought I was weird. But this is less than half of the people we have that are interested in nature and interested in different things. And for countries where we have economic challenges like Zimbabwe, having a space for young people to meet, like Martha was saying, mental wellness, you know, a safe space to make friends, learn about nature is such an important space for reprieve for young people and growth for their careers. So please support initiatives like this. They're very, very important. And like I said, ornithology is a conduit. We don't have binoculars, but we can see them. It's not like if I was an elephant ecologist, that'd be harder, you know. But birds are all around us, you know. If only we care to stop and there's so many ways to connect people to nature using birds. I had to be very creative about it, and we've grown and grown in leaps and bounds. And I work now. I'm passionate. I'm really passionate about working towards African-led conservation research. Last year, I was invited to, to Oxford University to to lead some workshops with a friend of mine. And we're working on a paper with various other early career researchers, a perspective paper about how to work towards African-led conservation research. A lot of conservation research in Africa is not led by African scientists, and it translates to how conservation action on the ground happens. Not to diminish any work that's being done, but it is important for local people to lead the charge. Wow, challenges. So bird conservation in Africa, if I was going to ask you, what do you want to see when you go to Africa? And even for bird lovers, it's always the big five. It's always a lion and whatnot. So the big five is a big colonial era legacy, a hunting legacy, but it's now synonymous with safari in Africa. That also translates to what gets funding, what research gets funded, what tourism people want to engage in. That also translates to what careers even young people that are interested in conservation want to get into. You know, that translates to which fields in conservation biology get jobs. So we exist in the shadow of, you know, megafauna, you know, whilst these other places, you know, have massive migrations and are not really competing with bears or other big charismatic species. We have to compete with like cute furry things that do nothing impressive, lie around all day, climb a tree, and everyone's clapping hands. um, but yeah, imagine wanting to be a raptor biologist, you know, and wanting to make that impression on people that raptors are actually also is impressive and important ecosystem part of the ecosystem. So that's another challenge we have. We actually sometimes often have to choose careers that go this direction out of just survival or exposure. And other barriers are access and mobility. Martha talked about embassies, but embassies mostly restrict access. You can't get to conferences sometimes. One person couldn't come to our Oxford conference because he couldn't get an EU transit visa. He had his UK visa, but to lay over at a EU country, he needed and that costs a lot of money. I had breakfast at the airport and I saw my South African bank accounts telling me how much it was. It was an omelette that was 5 times what I'd ever pay in South Africa. So imagine being a young person, getting an opportunity to be part of something in Oxford, and then you can't go because to lay over in some country in the EU and not even step out of the airport. You have to pay something that's more than your monthly salary just to be in that country for a few hours in an airport. So we have these access barriers, even in our own countries, lend tenure systems and so on. So we have these big barriers to young people being in this space. Volunteerism, volunteerism, nepotism, and gatekeeping. Walter talked about open source, how they're opening their science. In Africa, we have these people, also nepotism. We have these people that have been in the field long enough to take over their father's data sets, and a certain species research is synonymous with their family name, or it's like it's something they guard jealously. And you're just a black kid that's just interested in this. You're just learning about it, and nobody sees you as somebody who could lead that. These are things I've experienced myself in the field. People that treated you in certain ways when you're starting out because you do see that they didn't think you would make any impact or last. If they did know, they would have treated you differently. But it's so common, even among scientists themselves, to not collaborate or work together because at the end of the day, they're competing also for funding, so they gatekeep a lot. Volunteerism, because funding models, some of these funding models support a lot of Westerners coming to Africa, and opportunities go to those that can pay to volunteer, which to somebody like me trying to get by is impossible to do, you know. And then a lack of mentorship and upward mobility and just financial security. Diego also spoke about it earlier, that can we make a living out of, being a raptor biologist? Sometimes when you do get in, there's no upward mobility, you know. I'm doing a movement study right now, and I'm going to be an intern here for a couple of months. I want to learn how to do something that in Africa is reserved only for prime, people in advanced stages of their careers. But at that stage of my career, I'm so frustrated. I want to start a family, or I want to support my parents and my siblings. I can't afford to be in a field position. It just doesn't tally. But I already have these skills. I'm only now getting these skills that are so special, like trapping, putting a tag on a bird, a harness on a bird, studying the movement patterns. And then soon after that, when I graduate, I can't apply those skills. I can't train other people because I'm at a stage in my life that needs me to move on to something. So there is a leaky pipeline. Somebody that helped me with my field work was an American student who just finished his PhD and came to South Africa for a postdoc. His CV had about almost 1,000 birds he'd trapped, tagged, ringed, you know, and he was just a few years ahead of me, and he had such an impressive CV, which is testament to the kind of access students here get. From when you're an undergrad, you can be taken onto the field. You're not just somebody holding a bird while somebody better is doing the work, which is what we are in Africa. You're just somebody to hold or carry bags. You only get to be the scientist so late in your career, it just doesn't tally up to the stage of life you're in. So it's so important to have these mentors that, pair the right skills when they're needed to the right people, so that there's representation, inclusion, and transformation in the field. And for that, I'd like to thank Hawk Mountain, because I got these skills earlier on, that I could be visible, that I could have other young people interested in this field and getting into the field early on in their lives. So quickly, change can come about in us just prioritizing youth. cultural values. We worry so much about the problem of culture and beliefs and so forth, but therein lies opportunities if we know how to engage people and their cultures. Cultures actually put value in animals, whether it was a negative belief or positive, there is a way to work around it. There's research gaps, those are opportunities and not problems. There's a push for sustainable development. Storytelling is a really big. How many of you felt the click, the feeling the clickers on that video gave you, the video Walter played, when the gun shot that bird, he he captured us in that 1 minute of storytelling. And now there's just so many opportunities, social media, written audiobooks. There's just so many ways to tell stories because, to be honest, nobody is reading science papers. But so storytelling is important. Education, citizen science, like I said, 60 years of people watching birds. I know people were teenagers when they started and they're old people now and they're still watching those um, raptors. This is my last slide, but what you can do, because you're here for a reason, you love raptors. You're part of this family, this global family of people watching birds. What you can do, also, this is my late professor, Professor Peter Mundy, um, the godfather of vulture conservation in Africa. And this is the poster I got to present because of the SOAR grant. This was my first conference, and it was the Raptor Research Foundation conference in the Kruger. My first time in the Kruger in South Africa. So yeah, but what you can do, support fellowships like these and programs like these that build capacity instead of prioritizing projects. I know it's difficult because I've heard a lot of questions here. People follow the black kite story, the honey buzzard story. What they love is a species. So a lot of projects prioritize just the species, not the story around the species, the people living with the species, the flyway, So support projects that care for capacity building in that area, you know. How are you going to see such projects? They have young people, they are inclusive and diverse. They have people coming in and out. We've been seeing projects like that prioritize capacity building because they're more sustainable. Support programs that value education and outreach. They're more sustainable, So projects that really hinder people, ordinary people, local communities from coming in, learning about their work, those are not sustainable. When a pandemic hits, those people are going to fly away to their homes and local people are not going to continue the work. They'll always, if not, they'll always be fighting with local people and they'll never win the war. Support projects that are conserving common species. It is cheaper. It is cheaper to conserve common species, and it's easier to win people over than when you're preaching this doomed gospel, doomed species gospel. So support common species. And I have to say this because it's difficult in Africa to get funding for common species. There's just so many grants that could change our lives. But once you get to the point that says it has to be an endangered species, you have to close it and say, oh, wow, my species can die. I have to wait for it to be critically endangered. That happens so often. Lastly, support projects that are led by local researchers or include local researchers because they know the context better. I've seen this on the ground. They know you'll get more value for your money, you know. Yeah, and also support projects that compensate their staff and are ethical and sustainable. I have to really stress this. And there's so many projects, it's outrageous, that clearly state that none of this money can go towards compensating staff or people, or salaries and whatnot. And it's really unethical. It's really unethical. Our economies are very different. the money you donate here towards projects can go so far, farther than you can imagine. And to restrict entire amounts of funding to projects because you feel it's more moral for people to be volunteering is actually unethical. I speak as somebody who survived from being allowed to have a $40 a month stipend from my projects. It's really unethical. Like I showed you, I was on a tree, and if I had fallen out from there, I wouldn't have had any medical cover. I've been on projects and gotten tick fever and couldn't take $40 from there to get an x-ray done. These are the realities facing young Africans in this field. And it's really unethical to expect young people in these countries to even choose to follow these paths without supporting them. But that's all from me. I thank you all for being here today, and I hope I still have time for questions.
Thank you, Merlyn. Excellent. Martha, too. I think Martha's on Zoom. Does anybody have a question for either Marilyn or Martha? Got time for one, maybe two. Anybody? Oh, okay. Right. So when you got here and even afterwards, how did you kind of overcome like imposter syndrome if you had it? How did you kind of work through that?
So the phrase is something I learned really late in life. I never had because I knew when I was in high school I wanted to be here, and I knew the work I'd put into it, and I knew I was in a place I loved, the field I loved. So yeah, I I've always believed that I was in a place I love. I didn't feel like it was work or merit. I felt like it was a calling and a thing I was born to do. Maybe imposter syndrome comes when I get scholarships and things like that, and you meet with other people and you think their work is impressive. But in this field, it's always been a calling and work I need to rise up to the occasion for. So yeah, no. I've always been happy to do my work, and it's actually a privilege more than a challenge to me personally, um, to feel like I'm good enough to do it. Yeah.